Okay, so we're going to talk about how to interpret graphs today. So let's look at some notes here. So these are some important questions to ask yourself when you're looking at a graph or a table. So one, what is the independent variable? When we know the independent variable, we usually label as x. It's the one that is you usually substitute in an equation. If we talked about function tables, the dependent variable is what you get out of the equation. It depends on the independent variable, and usually that one is labeled as the y. Another thing to look at is paying attention to what is on the x-axis in a graph. If you have that labeled on the x-axis, that is your x variable. It's usually your independent variable. And then you want to pay attention to what's on the y-axis, which is your dependent variable. It's usually your y value. And you want to pay attention to those labels. When you're thinking about word problems and how to interpret the graph, you want to pay attention to what's on those labels. So you want to understand, when you look at a graph, what does the XY point stand for? And we're going to ask those questions as we evaluate some of the graphs and tables in the next slide. Okay, so looking at the next slide coming up, let's go back here. All right, so we can see here that I've labeled a table here for candy bars and money. So we want to ask ourselves what is going on here at the table. So we can look at the candy bars and money. So the number of candy bars that you buy will indicate how much money you have to spend. So here we see in this table that we buy 2 candy bars, it's going to cost us $6. 4 candy bars are going to cost us $9. 6 candy bars are going to cost us $12, 8, 15, and so on. So when we go over here to label the graph, then you're going to see here that we're going to write these as points. So if we thought of these as points going onto the graph, we want to label them as 2, 6, where 2 is our x and 6 is our y. So for 2 candy bars, you get $6. For 2 candy bars, it's $6. So when we think about that, we want to move it onto this graph as a coordinate point. So we're going to label the candy bars as our x-axis, and we're going to label the money on our y-axis. And then we're going to plot a point. You can see here that we put a point at 2, 6. And then we have labeled a point at 4, 9, at 6, 12, 8, 15, and 10, 18 to signify our number of candy bars and how much money it cost. We're then going to ask ourselves, what is the pattern that's going on between these numbers? So if we do that, you can see here that it's increasing $3 per candy bar. Is it for each candy bar? Well, let's look over here at the pattern between the numbers. So if I go here, you can see here that this is actually increasing $3 for 2 candy bars. And so we want to make that adjustment over here in our label, that it's actually $3 for 2 candy bars. Now later we're going to talk about how to turn that into a unit rate, but right now we just want you to understand the pattern between them. So you can see here that even in our graph, we can see that this goes up 3 because it's in the money, on the money side or the Y side, and it's going over the number of candy bars. So you can see here the 2 candy bars, and it's going up the $3. So here as we look at this, this all fits together. The candy bars here we label as X, and the money here we label as Y, which gets transferred over here to our graph, which is very important when you're interpreting tables and graphs. So not always in a table is the X on the left-hand side, but majority of the time when you see a table like this, X is on the left-hand side and Y is on the right-hand side. All right, so let's look at this one. So here I did minutes and miles. Actually, I'm going to change it to hours and miles. It makes more sense. So I'm going to go over here and label the X and Y axis. So here we have hours and miles. So you can see here that I've taken the table and went ahead and labeled my X and Y axis. So I'm going to ask myself the same questions. Which one is my independent and which one is my dependent variable? So X is my independent, Y is my dependent, and we move that over here to our axis. Okay, so again, I'm going to take these in the table and I'm going to make points. So 0, 0, 120, 240, 360, 480, and 5, 100. So let's talk about what this means. So it means that obviously if you don't drive any hours, you don't go any miles. If you drive 1 hour, you'll go 20 miles. 2 hours, 40 miles, 3 hours, 60 miles, 4 hours, 80 miles, and 5 hours, 100 miles. Now over here, I've labeled this graph with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to make the y-axis a little smaller. We're not going to get all of them graphed, but that way you can see just how to scale one. I'm going to count by fives. Now we're not going to get all of these on the points on the graph, but we're going to get enough that we can see a pattern. So I'm going to count by fives here. And I can get from here all the way to 60. Okay, so then I'm going to put my first dot at 0, 0. So that is the first dot. We're going to talk about this in class as a proportional relationship. And one of the ways that you can indicate a proportional relationship is that it goes through the origin. And we can see that this one does. So then I'm going to plot the other dots here. The other points. So you can see here that this is, we went over 1 and up 20. So 1 hour, 20 miles, 2 hours, 40 miles, and we got all the way to 60. So we can look at this enough to see if there's a pattern between the points. And when we look at that pattern over on the side, we see that there's 20 miles for every 1 hour. So if you look at this, this is going up 20 miles every hour. So we can see that also on the grid that it's also 20 miles. It's going up 20 miles. And so we can see that here. And this is in 1 hour. So when you're asked about a pattern, you can look at this pattern between the points that you've plotted on the graph and look at how much a block is worth. So you can see here that even though that it's 4 blocks, those blocks are worth 20. So that's very important when you're reading a graph, is to look at the scale and tell what it's counting by. So 20 miles for every 1 hour. So as you practice this, really pay attention to the X and Y axis and what they're labeled from a table, and then look to see if you have any patterns that you can tell. Now, in this case, we've used a straight line, and that's again going to indicate a proportional relationship. So we're going to talk about that a little later, but just keep that in your mind as you're talking about it. So I hope this helps.